Recently, I was on the internet looking for some simple, easy project ideas for our CNC machines. One thing that really caught my eye was an item called a Nordic tray. It was a simple wooden tray, but it had a lovely shape and form. It had a waveform to it, and there was a whole series of steps made by a repeating cut from the router. It looked like either a straight bit or a ball nose had been used. And I thought, hey, that is a fantastic idea. And I did a little more looking and found all sorts of items. Easy to make, great scrap wood projects, great gifts, and that's what we're up to today on CNC Basecamp. Well, to create the step patterns for our accessories, there are a couple of different bits that we may want to use. First off, take a look at these. These are round over bits. They're kind of the type you'd use for making a beadboard. So instead of having a pilot, they come pretty much to a point. Now I've got a 1/4 inch here, a 1/8 inch radius, and a 3/8 inch radius. That's a pretty good selection. And so those are going to give kind of a rope-like or rattan look to our products. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, we can use a round over. Here I have a 2-flute upcut, which is going to give a nice aggressive cut. And here, of course, a core box bit. So the larger bits we're going to use are going to be core box. The smaller ones can just be a straight end mill. And finally, if we wanted a groove that has corners on it, just a plain straight bit like this will give great results. So you can try different things. They're each going to look a little bit different. See what you like. And with that, let's go ahead and get started on our first project. Well, for our next project, we're going to use a 1/4 inch round over again. But instead of making a round trivet, it's going to be square. So I think it should be fun. Well, there's the square trivet. I think that's kind of cool. Next up, for a change of pace, we are going to go with a larger bit, a 3/8 inch radius, and we're going to go back to the round form. So it'll be a much more kind of pillowy look. I think it should be good. All right, well, I'm going to change things up for the next two projects. I've got on the router a 1/4 inch round over bit. And it's going to make a fairly narrow step in our project, but it's going to look good. So I've got a waveform platter and an arch top. Now normally I would cut all the step portion first and then do our final profile, but what I found out is that when I cut the profile, I'm getting a lot of tearing as it crosses over the steps. So I'm going to switch things up here. We're going to cut the profile first. I'm going to leave plenty of tabs. Then we're going to come back and do the steps to create the waveform, and it'll work a little bit better. So let's go ahead and get started on our first project. Now this project is an arch-topped platter. And like before, we're going to cut the perimeter out first, then do all the steps. And that's just going to make for a cleaner cut with less tear out. Well, the next project we're going to do is a small round bowl, and we're going to step down the interior. So I thought this would be a good time to talk a little bit about using Vectric V-Carve and how I set up the cut for really all of these different projects. Now if you look at the screen here, you're going to see a lot of concentric circles, and each one of those represents a step down into the interior of the bowl. Now for any of these projects, one of the first things I had to determine was the spacing between the cuts, because for a lot of these I'm choosing to have the router bit cut directly on the line. Now the spacing is going to be determined by the diameter of the router bit and the type of router bit. So let's say I'm using a 3/8 inch radius roundover. In order to get that kind of semicircular rattan look, the spacing is 3/4 of an inch, or twice the radius. In this case, I know that I'm wanting a 1/4 inch spacing in these steps, and so that's what they are. This first step begins at 1 inch for the overall diameter, and then from there each one extends out until I achieve my final diameter for the bowl. Now to set up the different cuts, each cut is a pocket cut, and so the first pocket cut is this first interior ring, and all the material within that boundary is going to be cut down to a depth of 1/8 of an inch. Once that first pocket is cleared, we're then going to go to the second, the third, and so on until we're all the way down at the very bottom of the bowl, which is going to leave approximately 1/4 of an inch of thickness at the very bottom. So we do need to know our overall thickness of our stock before we begin. The final cut is going to be a profile cut, which is going to separate the bowl from the parent material. So let's take a look at a 3D view, and let me go ahead and just reset this, and then let's preview all tool paths, and we'll see it being made. And so that's what we should end up with when we're all finished. These are easy to lay out, all the platters, the bowls. It's just a matter of using the drawing tools available and making sure that all the rings are concentric. So we're ready to cut the bowl. I'm using stock that's 1 5/8 of an inch thick. And so each of the steps is 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to leave a 1/4 inch thickness at the bottom of the bowl. The bit that I have in place is a bit like this, and it's a big, long 1/4 inch upcut bit. And that extra length is going to be necessary because of the depth or the thickness of the wood. So we're all ready now, and we'll get started. Well, here's our finished accessories. I think they turned out pretty well. So we've got the rattan look, we've got all these different ones with the Nordic look, the grooves. We've made a nice bowl, and I love the candle holder. It's got kind of a deco flair to it. So these are easy projects. They're fast. You can use up the scrap wood in your shop, and they use just a couple of bits. So we're using a round over, a ball nose, and of course a straight bit for a lot of our profile cuts. Easy to do, a lot of fun. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed watching this. The plans are available on the website, and I hope to see you next month. Well, it's always great fun to learn about new tools, new software in the world of CNC. Well, recently we've been doing a lot of work for next wave automation. There's a piece of software which I've really enjoyed getting to know, and I think it'll be fun for you to learn a little bit about it. It's called Virtual Zero. And what does it do? Well, you know, when we create files for our CNC work, they're always flat. There's always an assumption we're working off a flat board. But what Virtual Zero allows you to do is to take a file that's been created in that flat format and actually bend it. So my example here is I have this little coffee shop chair, and the back of it is, of course, cut to a radius to cradle your back. So how do we get the Starlight Coffee Shop onto that? Well, we use Virtual Zero, and it's actually going to bend the file to this shape. And that's really a great thing because it allows us to use our CNC machines for not only chair backs, but for signs, mantle freezes, which could be curved, all sorts of different applications. So it's another tool in the kit bag. The procedure to do this really involves mapping points because the program has to have a map for what the shape is. And we're going to do this by starting, I've loaded my regular file in the proper post processor, and I've tapped on Virtual Zero to get that started. And what we're going to do now is go through a process of mapping points using the probe. So I'm going to start by capturing the points, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is I need to go ahead and move my machine to the center of my workpiece, and we're going to establish a center point. Now that I have the router bit centered over my workpiece, I'm going to go ahead and use our touch plate and establish that first location. So let me raise it up and get a confirmation, and we'll go ahead and takes a little bit of time for the probe to reach down there because it's going to retract fairly high each time to make sure that it clears the material. So pause briefly and we'll continue on down. There we go. And now the machine's going to move to the next location, and we're going to go ahead and continue to map the points. You can manually select the points yourself or allow the program to give you a series of suggested points. Now, one thing I've certainly found is that it takes quite a few points to map out the surface accurately. Right now we're just going ahead and doing 4 perimeter points along with the center. Now it does take a little time to build the profile, but once you have it, you can save it, and it can be used on multiple files. So if I have some V-carving to do and then some profile work, the map that we're creating right now will hold and be good for both. So that completes the first points. Now, as you can see, the program has some suggested points, and those are flashing right now. And we can also just go ahead and manually add them. So I'm going to add one here, here, and I'm going to add kind of a smattering because it really does make a difference. The more points you add, the more accurate this is going to be. So it gets a little dull moving the touch plate around, but it really does make a huge difference. So I'm adding quite a few. Now I'm using a small touch plate here. The large touch plate that usually comes with this machine is going to end up spanning over some of the radius. So a small touch plate like this one really does make a difference. Now, of course, if I had 60 chairs to do for the Starlight Cafe, I would only be mapping this once, provided that the blanks were all the same. So if you can be consistent in your manufacturing of the parts, then you can be pretty efficient in setting up the program and running them all. Well, we've got a lot of points plotted. I think we're ready to start. So let me fire up the machine and let's see what happens. Well, we finished up the V carving for our chair back. Now, with that map that was created using Virtual Zero, we could also have run a profile cut complete with tabs to separate out our V carved back from the parent stock. So you can run multiple files with that same map. A lot of possibilities, cool stuff, and I think it's something very interesting for us CNC nerds. Hope you enjoyed learning about it.